under your chairship. Now, I must know a different BBC from most MPs in this place today, because the BBC is a service that people are forced to pay for, even if they don't use it. It's not fair. And people can even go to prison for not paying the fine. And it's normally the people that do go to prison for not paying the fine are young, single mothers. And the BBC, as we all know, has been riddled with scandal for the past 100 years, but more so in the past few decades. And yes, I agree, the BBC has made some great programmes over the years, great documentaries, environmental programmes, etc. But they've also produced a whole raft of dodgy TV personalities, which probably nobody will mention in this room. Well, I'll tell you what, they do mention it outside in the real world. Personalities such as Jimmy Savile, Hugh Edwards, Chris Denning, Jonathan King, Chris Langham, Stuart Hall, Rolf Harris, Philip Schofield, a whole raft of perverts that have stalked the corridors of the BBC. And none of these here will talk about this. Not one of them. And mark my words, Miss Harris, there are still these creatures stalking the corridors of the BBC, and in the future their names will come out and come back to this. Would you like to intervene? No, I thought not. Look at what they've done.
I'll have no chanting from a sedentary petition, please. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Miss Harris. Look what they did to Cliff Richard. Filmed a raid on his house, an innocent man. Look what they did to Princess Diana. Look what they did to Donald Trump, our closest ally. Bob Villan on the stage shouting, "Death, death to the IDF." And what about the Gaza documentaries? And what about the honourable member for Clacton? Dodgy reporting on his bank accounts. The list goes on and on, Miss Harris.
Would he give way?
I will give way on that point, yeah.
Tom Rutland.
Mentions bank accounts. Would he like to declare how much he has received in earnings from another broadcast media channel in the past year in his register of interests?
I'm quite happy to declare that. It's on my register of interests. It's £100,000 a year, and it's probably more than the honourable member will ever get paid for appearing on TV. That's if he gets paid anything at all. Anyway, I'm not paying my licence fee. I've not paid it for about 10 years. I'm not paying to subsidise the pensions of people like Hugh Edwards. Now, some people in this room, probably all of them, Miss Harris, may think I'm being a little bit unfair on the BBC. But I'd like anybody in this room, get on your phones right now and provide evidence of another broadcaster that has been riddled with as many scandals as the BBC. Besides, but I'll finish with this. I hope the Minister will agree with me and the vast majority of the British public that people should have a choice. It should be a subscription service, and then people can decide whether or not they watch it and whether or not they pay for it. Thank you, Ms. Harris.
The opening moments of this footage establish a familiar institutional setting, but the tension does not come from raised voices or disorder. IT comes from a deliberate challenge to authority delivered inside a chamber designed to absorb and neutralize dissent. From the outset, the speaker positions himself against a system that is not optional, not voluntary, and not easily escaped. The subject is framed not as entertainment, but as compulsion, an obligation enforced by law, backed by penalties that disproportionately land on those with the least ability to resist. This framing is not incidental. IT is the foundation on which every subsequent escalation rests. As the speech unfolds, the power dynamic begins to shift subtly. The speaker is not addressing the public directly. He is addressing colleagues, officials, and by extension the institutional guardians of the system itself. His tone is controlled, but confrontational. He invokes vulnerability, specifically those who suffer consequences for non-compliance, before pivoting toward institutional hypocrisy. This move is strategic. By anchoring the critique in social impact, the speaker creates moral leverage before naming misconduct. The system is no longer merely inefficient or outdated. IT is portrayed as unjust. What follows is an escalation that transforms criticism into accusation. The speaker catalogues reputational failures and scandals, not as isolated incidents, but as evidence of a persistent pattern. This is a classic agency maneuver, reframing individual wrongdoing as systemic failure. Within institutional environments, this is a red line. Systems intolerate reform discussions. They resist narratives that imply rot rather than repair. The response from the chamber, attempts at order, interruptions, procedural restraint, signals that this line has been crossed. The presiding authority attempts to reassert control through procedural language. This is not about the substance of the claims. It is about restoring equilibrium. When institutions feel threatened, they default to process. Process becomes the shield. But process alone cannot diffuse an argument that has already moved beyond policy into legitimacy. The speaker anticipates this and presses forward, widening the scope of critique to include high-profile cases that resonate far beyond the chamber. Each reference is a pressure point, designed to remind listeners that institutional actions have real-world consequences. At this stage, the power struggle becomes more visible. Another member intervenes, not to refute the underlying critique, but to redirect it toward personal credibility. This is a pivotal moment. When institutions cannot easily defend the system, they question the messenger. Financial interests are erased, not as a matter of transparency, but as an attempt to dilute moral authority. The implication is clear: criticism is compromised if the critic benefits from a similar ecosystem. The response is immediate and calculated. Rather than retreat, the speaker discloses the information outright, reframing what was meant as a vulnerability into a demonstration of confidence. Disclosure becomes defiance. The attempt to undermine credibility instead amplifies the speaker's posture as someone unafraid of scrutiny. This is the UTH moment selected for the opening hook. In that brief exchange, control moves away from procedural restraint and toward narrative dominance. Following this exchange, the speaker escalates further by openly admitting non-compliance with the very system under debate. This is not a casual admission. It is a direct challenge to enforcement legitimacy. In institutional terms, this is an act of civil disobedience voiced from within the institution itself. The message is unmistakable: the rules are not merely flawed. They are unworthy of obedience. This transforms the discussion from reform to refusal. The remainder of this segment reinforces a central thesis: choice versus coercion. The argument is no longer about personalities or scandals alone. It is about consent. By reframing the issue as a lack of choice, the speaker aligns the critique with broader principles of autonomy and fairness. This is a powerful repositioning because it shifts the burden of justification back onto the institution. Systems that rely on compulsion must constantly defend right choice is unacceptable. Throughout this portion of the footage, what stands out is not volume or spectacle, but accumulation. Each point builds on the last, creating a sense of inevitability. Small procedural interruptions fail to regain control because the narrative has already escaped them. This is how authority erodes, not through chaos, but through sustained, disciplined challenge delivered in a space that assumes compliance. Part 1 concludes with the institution still standing, but visibly unsettled. The formalities remain intact, yet the moral certainty they rely on has been punctured. The stage is now set for deeper examination: how systems respond when challenged from within, how enforcement power is justified, and how easily accountability is deflected when authority feels exposed.
The final moments of this footage do not resolve the conflict. Instead, they crystallize it. What remains after the formal exchange is not a policy outcome or a disciplinary response, but a record of how power behaves when its moral certainty is challenged from inside its own walls. The chamber returns to order, yet the underlying questions raised by the confrontation remain deliberately unanswered. This is not oversight. It is institutional instinct. By this stage, the system has made a choice. Rather than engage directly with the implications of coercion, unequal enforcement, and consent, it opts for procedural closure. The debate ends not because the issue has been settled, but because the allotted space for dissent has expired. This is a crucial distinction. Institutions often confuse closure with resolution. In reality, they are opposites. Closure suppresses momentum. Resolution requires reckoning. The speaker's final framing around choice is the most destabilizing element of the entire exchange. Choice, when introduced into compulsory systems, forces a re-evaluation of legitimacy. If people should be free to opt out, then enforcement mechanisms must be justified beyond tradition and convenience. This shifts the burden from the citizen to the institution. The absence of a direct rebuttal to this framing speaks volumes. It suggests that the system is not prepared to defend compulsion on ethical grounds, only on procedural ones. What this footage ultimately reveals is not the misconduct of a single actor, but the anatomy of institutional avoidance. The chamber demonstrates how authority maintains itself by fragmenting critique, addressing tone instead of substance, disclosure instead of disparity, future reform instead of present harm. Each of these deflections is small on its own. Together, they form a comprehensive strategy for preserving legitimacy without earning it. This pattern is not unique to this setting. It mirrors the dynamic seen repeatedly in enforcement-based systems, including law enforcement interactions captured on bodycam footage. Authority is asserted first, questioned second, and justified last, if at all. When justification becomes uncomfortable, the system relies on silence, time limits, and procedural transitions to move on. The issue is not disproven, it is outlasted. The admission of non-compliance remains one of the most telling moments, not because it is dramatic, but because of how it is treated. There is no immediate consequence, no enforcement response, no follow-up within the exchange. This absence underscores a central truth about power: enforcement is selective. Rules are rigid for some and flexible for others. That disparity is rarely acknowledged openly, yet it underpins public trust erosion more than any single scandal. By allowing the moment to pass without engagement, the institution tacitly confirms what the critique implies. Compliance is expected from those without leverage. Those with visibility can challenge the system without facing its full weight. This is how legitimacy erodes quietly, not through overt injustice, but through normalized exception. As the footage concludes, the system appears stable. The chamber stands. Procedures continue. But stability is not the same as strength. True institutional strength lies in the ability to withstand scrutiny without retreating into formality. What we see here is not resilience, but rigidity, a reliance on structure to compensate for unresolved ethical questions. For viewers accustomed to bodycam footage of street-level encounters, this exchange offers a rare view of authority under pressure at the top of the hierarchy. The dynamics are the same, even if the setting is different. Commands are issued. Challenges are redirected. Accountability is deferred. The difference is not in behavior, but in consequence. On the street, defiance often meets immediate force. In institutional halls, it meets procedural silence. This comparison is not accidental. Systems that tolerate internal defiance while punishing external resistance reveal their priorities. Order is preserved not through fairness, but through control of context. Inside the chamber, dissent is contained by time and decorum. Outside, it is contained by enforcement. Both serve the same function: maintaining authority without addressing legitimacy. The lasting impact of this footage lies in what it leaves unresolved. The question of consent remains open. The disparity in enforcement remains unaddressed. The institutional pattern of deflection remains intact. These are not failures of debate, they are features of power maintenance. Part 3 ends where the institution prefers all challenges to end, without conclusion. But for the audience, the absence of resolution is itself the conclusion. It reveals a system more comfortable managing dissent than answering it, more adept at closing discussions than confronting their implications. And that, ultimately, is the quiet tension this footage leaves behind. Not outrage, not spectacle, but the unsettling recognition that authority can persist even when its justification is left standing unanswered.